We think women need to talk more openly about money because money really matters. It shouldn't be embarrassing or confusing. Join the conversation. We'll be discussing a whole range of topics which will help you get comfortable with your finances. Money Matters. Brought to you by AJ Bell.
Hello and welcome to the AJ Bell Money Matters podcast, a podcast that's aimed at helping women get comfortable and confident with their finances. I'm Laura, and as ever, I'm joined by Danni. Hey, Danni.
Hi, Laura. Hi, everyone. Welcome back if you are a regular listener, and welcome if this is your first ever listen. We try and tackle a whole range of different financial issues and bring in some brilliant female guests to help bring you tips and tricks to become financially fitter.
And if you haven't already, do take a look at our website. It's ajbellmoneymatters.co.uk, and you'll find a whole host of articles, our back catalogue of podcasts, and there's a link there where you can sign up to our newsletter so you can keep up to date with everything that we're doing. And you can also suggest topics that you want us to cover on the podcast, or even people that you might want as future guests on the podcast.
Now, this week, we have drafted in the Sun newspaper's consumer champion, Laura Purkess, who shares some of her thoughts about your rights, tackling wrongdoing, and the satisfaction of a job well done. And it was really interesting because I spoke to her just as all the furore about dynamic pricing that, of course, lots of Oasis fans, they were stuck in the queue for tickets. Then when they got to the checkout, they found out that they were paying more than they expected. And that is something that is currently allowed under UK consumer law. But she questioned at the time whether or not it was ethical and whether something should be done. And literally days after that, we got an announcement from the UK competitions watchdog that they're going to investigate the whole situation. So it is really worth staying tuned to listen to her because she is a feisty lady.
And as well as our special guest, we always tackle one big issue that you've asked us to look at, or one that's caught our attention over the past week. And to tie in beautifully with our interview this week, we're going to be digging into the murky world of scams. So there's been quite a lot of news around from different organisations about the level of scams in the UK. So we're going to break down some of that and look at what you can do to protect yourself from being scammed.
Yeah, it was really interesting because, of course, September is very much a sort of back to school, back to work, put those lovely holidays behind you. And with the work grind, the UK finance-led initiative Take 5 to Stop Fraud has highlighted September as a particularly tricky month when we can become really vulnerable to fraud. You know, we're a bit overwhelmed by clearing out our email inboxes, and we might be going a bit faster than normal. And they've been talking to people, did a survey, and found that almost half of the people that they spoke to were more likely to overlook details and maybe not scrutinize communications properly. And that, of course, then heightens your risk of being conned. And more than a third admitted that being preoccupied makes them more prone to taking risks or maybe falling for an enticing deal that they otherwise might not do. And I think with everything, the old adage, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is, really needs to be front and center. So their advice is stop and think, particularly if you are being asked for money, because just that 5 seconds, if you challenge, if you think, hang on, could this be fake? And sometimes you just look at maybe the email address and it's one letter out from what you're used to, or, you know, maybe you've had something through. I had something recently from my email provider, and it was asking me to change my password, and it never does that. And automatically I'm clicking the link before I stop to think, and I was almost there, and I'm like, hang on, they don't normally ask me this stuff. And of course, it was a scam, or certainly the address wasn't right. And when I looked into it, lots of people had been taken in. So if you do that, then you can prevent yourself from being scammed. And if you think you have been scammed, then there is a number, 159. It's been set up to give you that really instant connection with most banks out there. And I must admit, it is terrifying. And I had a letter just a few months ago from a debt collection agency wanting huge amounts of cash from a mobile phone contract that I'd taken out and ran up hundreds of pounds worth of bills. And I'm thinking, well, I've got a mobile phone contract. I've got phone contracts for the kids. My husband has one as well, but not with this provider. And taking a look, I realized that it was the wrong name that was on it. Someone had used my address to take out this contract. So I did actually get in touch with the debt collection company. I reported it to Action Fraud. I gave the company this Action Fraud number, and that was it. It went away. But initially, I must admit, my first thought was, oh my gosh, I've never had to deal with a debt collection agency before. And it was quite scary.
Yeah, and I think that would be scary. And then you start to worry about, the impact on your credit report or, how legitimate these companies are. And I think, like you say, it's so easy to be caught out by these emails and texts because there's so many of them that come in now to us. So easy to be caught out by them when you're busy and you're rushing and you're just trying to get tasks done, which I think sums up September for a lot of us. It's either that return from holiday or it's kids back to school. It's a very busy time. And so I feel like it's very easy to see why people might be more taken in by these things when you're just rushing to complete all of your admin tasks and you're not really taking those, 5 minutes, 5 seconds, like you said, Danny, to scrutinize the emails and the letters and the texts that you're getting. And the Financial Ombudsman Service says that the number of customer complaints about banking related frauds or scams have reached their highest level since before the pandemic. So almost 9,000 consumers have made complaints between April and the end of June, which is the highest number since the service started collecting the data. And over half of those are related to what's called authorized push payment fraud, which is a very industry jargony word, often shortened to APP, but effectively it encapsulates all fraud where customers have been encouraged to transfer money and they've actively approved the payments online. So that's what a lot of these scams are. It's things where you have to pay a small amount of money to get a parcel delivered, for example, is a very common one, or pay a small amount of money and to reclaim some tax or to get a payment. And it's where individuals have actually made that transfer themselves, often from their online banking. But the Ombudsman says that these scams are becoming much more complex, they're becoming more convincing. And I think what's interesting is we've got those figures and we've got those complaints, but actually that will be the tip of the iceberg because so many people who get scammed just feel really embarrassed. They feel embarrassed, they don't want to report it, they kind of either blame themselves or they're too embarrassed to report it to the actual authorities. So we know that the amount of fraud out there is growing, but we also know that it's far bigger than what the official figures report. Now, the Ombudsman says it's been able to return more than £150 million to victims of fraud. And lots of banks are signed up to this voluntary code that gives some extra protection for consumers and means that far more people are reimbursed for fraud now than they previously were. But around half of those cases that the Ombudsman said were reported, more than half of them weren't covered by that code. And we still know that there's lots of people out there that don't get reimbursed for that fraud, either because the bank wasn't signed up to the code or because it falls into the kind of so-called exceptional circumstances that the bank allows, or because people need to push harder to get that refund, which is what we see a lot of the money section consumer champions, like the one that we're speaking to shortly. A lot of their job is to kind of push those banks and those companies a bit harder to get those refunds. There are other protections, though. If you've used a credit or a debit card, there's some protections there. Under the chargeback scheme or under Section 75, it's called. So it is worth looking into those protections that you've got if you've bought something on a credit or debit card and then it has failed to appear, which is quite often the case. I mean, we've talked a bit before about Instagram scams and, the ads that come up on Instagram and thinking that they're legitimate products when actually they turn out to be scams.
And you were talking about this voluntary scheme for push payment fraud. Well, there are mandatory repayment rules being brought in by the payment system regulator, the PSR. That is happening in October of 2024, in case you are listening to this episode at a later date. And that should also then speed up the time that it takes for you to get reimbursed. But there's been quite a lot of furore about the amount that you will be repaid, because the maximum, it had been considered that maybe up to £415,000 you would get repaid if you'd been found to be the victim of this push payment fraud. But actually, that is now going to be set at £85,000. Now, it sounds like a huge amount, which should cover most people. And indeed, the regulator reckon it would only exclude about 10% of claims by value. But which has said, look, there are certain scams, investment scams you were just talking about there, also house purchase fraud, which can leave some people hugely out of pocket. And in that case, it really can destroy lives. I mean, that was certainly the phrase that was used by Which. But what the PSR has said is that mostly it will cover most cases. And there was a lot of concern that maybe by increasing the amount that could be repaid, actually it could act like a bit of a red flag to scammers who might think, right, well, we're going to try and push as far as we can to get more money. And certainly there were a lot of lenders that were quite concerned that particularly smaller lenders, if they had to pay back this huge amount of money, could really struggle if there were an awful lot of fraud cases doing the rounds. There's also been a lot of talk by these financial groups saying that actually they need to go further and not just be looking at finding these repayments and making sure that people are protected that way, but also holding social media companies responsible. You were just talking about Instagram there, Laura. We know so many of these scams start their lives as these glossy looking videos on the likes of Instagram. And those are the kind of things which are really easy to fall victim to. And, this is something that people shouldn't be embarrassed by, because we know that there are some really clever scams out there. And the whole point of a scam is to take you in. And yeah, if you do fall victim to it, please don't just think, right, I'm just not going to do anything about it. I'm too embarrassed. Do something, because you should get your money back in an awful lot of cases.
Yeah, and I think you're right to say it's the quicker you act after you realise that you've been scammed, the more likely you might be to get your money back, because it means that the bank has a greater chance of being able to track down where that money's gone and freeze it and potentially get it back, which obviously increases your chances of the bank reimbursing you if they can get the money back themselves. But also, I think it's a case of definitely read around your rights to it, and push harder for refunds if you're initially declined by your bank, because there are lots of circumstances that we see and that we read about where people are potentially initially declined for that refund and then actually push harder and get it. And I mean, that's the same when it comes to anything that affects our hard-earned cash. So if we buy something online and it arrives broken, or it doesn't live up to the pictures, or if we get delayed on a flight or a train and we don't get compensated, or like many people, if we're in queues for hours to buy tickets for Oasis and then we find the price is higher than we've been expected, we all want to complain, don't we, in those situations? And lots of those situations we have a valid right to a refund or reimbursement. And hopefully those complaints end up getting compensated. But lots of us, I'm sure, get cross to family and friends, but then actually don't do anything about following up a refund or complaining to the company involved.
I know I'm certainly guilty of that. And I imagine so many people listening to this, it happens to you, and for a couple of days you're like, I'm going to do something about it. And then life, as we said, it's so complicated, it gets in the way, and we don't. And we just grumble for probably years afterwards about the situation that we found ourselves in. But following through is really important. That's something that Laura Purkess feels really strongly about. She, as we said, is the Sun's consumer champion, and she spends all of her working hours trying to help people get compensation, get an apology, fair treatment. I asked her after the interview if there was any difference between the number of men and women who come to her, and she said, no, it's pretty fairly split gender-wise. But she says that sometimes the tone is a bit different. Women tend to come to her asking if they have a complaint, whereas men tend to be asking for help escalating a complaint that they are sure that they have. Now, of course, she said that is a generalization, but it is an interesting point. And I really think as women, we often feel that we need to get that go ahead from others, that we're right to push. Now, it can be friends, family, support networks, communities like our Money Matters one. But Laura had some great tips for everyone to consider. Laura, thanks so much for joining us. Look, your role as the Sun's consumer champion, I'm guessing that you hear a lot of really sad stories. Have any surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of sad, I hear a lot of sad stories in that some of them are just so bleak. It's hard to like to wrap your head around. I guess sometimes I just can't believe how, you know, dire some people's situations are, and they're still in this situation where the companies won't help them. I think that makes me sad as well. You know, on my job, I see both sides. I talk to companies and I talk to people, and I know often the companies want to do the right thing for their customers. So sometimes it's just amazing. It shocks me that some people are in this situation with a company where something's gone so wrong. You know, I can't wrap my head around how at so many stages it's gone that badly. So yeah, that it shocks me on both sides, the stories themselves, but also how it's got to where it's got to by the time I see it. It can be really shocking, yeah.
And we were laughing because you have a T-shirt which says "small and mighty" on it, and that's exactly how I described you, small and mighty. But you have the clout of the Sun behind you, and having that does make a difference. So, how do you then choose which of those cases you take on, which of those people you help?
Yeah, we do get overwhelmed. You know, everyone says, you know, journalists get really overwhelmed. I didn't really believe how overwhelmed I could be when I first started. I kind of had a slow stream of letters coming in, and I tried to reply to everyone. And now I just get so many. It's near impossible, but I do try to take on as many as possible, even if I'm not 100% sure it's going to be anything that I can use in the paper. If it's a really simple one, I try to just do them as like a matter of course, as part of my job. And then but sometimes if I see one that I just think is particularly bad, like the company's behave particularly badly, that's the one where I think I'm really going to take time on this, because for it to have got to the stage that it's at, I just think this really requires the clout of the Sun, as you said. So those ones I will put my time into, you know, where I can see the email threads and I know that something's gone really wrong. I will really take my time on those. Some of them are very simple, and I think it's often just a miscommunication. It's fallen in the wrong, you know, in the wrong hands of the company. Some of those are really easy to fix, and I'll just get those through. We do get a lot where people write in and it's just not something, it's not for me, you know, it's where their situation's really bad, but it's not that a company's done something wrong. With those ones, we tend to just reply with a bit of advice, or guidance, or signpost them to the right place, but we can't help everyone. So that's kind of my priorities.
Now, you can't help everyone, and I would imagine in some of the cases we can help ourselves. You know, we've all been overcharged. Maybe we've not got what we were expecting. Something's been damaged when it's arrived. But I would imagine, and I know I've been guilty of this, I've thought I'm going to complain and then I don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's what companies are expecting. Most of us will just say, I can't be bothered.
I think it's what they're counting on, to be honest. I don't want to be so cynical, but I've become quite cynical. I think that companies are absolutely counting on you not complaining. And they'll often, you know, they'll use terms that they think will make you feel like you're not in the position that you're actually in. You know, a lot of companies know that under the Consumer Rights Act, they should be doing so and so. And they'll not allude to that at all, you know. And if you don't know your rights, they can get away with this really easily. I just think, as you were saying, the stuff that we can do to help ourselves, knowing your rights is so important. And I know that sounds overwhelming. How is a regular person supposed to know those rights? But there are some really simple ones that I just feel like everyone should know. And for example, under the Consumer Rights Act, if you get something and it's not what you ordered or it's broken, the retailer has to replace that free of charge. And we so often see retailers saying, well, that's the delivery company's fault. That's not our problem. You could have broken it. But if you complain straight away, you're absolutely protected on that. And I just think so many people don't realise that. And it's so simple. And if you choose to, as you say, not do anything about it, that can leave you in a difficult position, because the company can say, well, you could have broken it. But if you just take that action immediately, you'll always be covered. So I just think that little step and just knowing your rights is really important for everyone.
So how do we go about finding out those rights if we're not sure? Is it a matter that we should take on every slight, or are we better just sort of picking and choosing? Because most of us don't have time to deal with every niggle, every annoyance, every time that something isn't right for us.
Well, I mean, in my view is that we would all help each other massively if we all fought for everything, because I think that companies really rely on us not, and everything that you don't fight is where the company wins, and they think they can get away with it again. So I really think that it would be best if everyone fought every complaint. But as you said, obviously you don't always have time. That's what people like me are here for, I suppose. But there are also so many places you can go. There are dispute resolution services like Resolver, which manage complaints kind of en masse that people might not know about. But if you just look on the internet, you can often find a dispute resolution service that will help you. You can talk to places like Citizens Advice. They know all of this stuff. All of their advisors have access to this information. So if you take something to them, they can tell you whether or not it's worth you pursuing, basically, and what your rights are. Yeah.
Are there some golden rules then about making a complaint? Are there certain steps that you should take that will help you make sure that you're going to get a resolution that works in your favour?
Golden rules. I would say when you go back to a company, don't give them any leeway. I often see people where they've had threads with companies, email threads, and they're kind of saying, well, I'd really appreciate it if you could do this. And companies, again, I sound so cynical, but they rely on, being able to get around stuff. You've got to be so firm with these companies and tell them that you're in the right. That's my number one golden rule. Just be really firm. Don't take any rubbish from these companies, and don't let them, gaslight you. I just see this so much. I'll talk about a specific case actually because I think it's really relevant. I'm actually writing it this week, but that's fine. I was recently contacted by someone who had been. He'd ordered some skylights for a new room he was doing from a skylights company, and he'd been sent 2 sets that were smashed. They both arrived smashed, and he asked for a third set, and the set that arrived was completely the wrong size. And he went back, and I saw this email chain, and he said, I want another set. And they said, well, you've already had 3 perfectly good sets. We've been so generous. What makes you think that you have the right to another set? And he'd kind of just been, a bit like, well, I'd really appreciate it. And I was like, no, you don't have to really appreciate that they're doing you a good favor. This is their legal responsibility. And, you don't owe these companies anything. You've already paid. Those are your goods. You've paid for them. And it's their responsibility. And just giving them that wiggle room allows them to make you feel like you're being done a favor when you're just being sold what you paid for, So that was a real case of when I stepped in and I said, no, actually, these are his legal rights. And then they were quickly like, yeah, okay, sent him a new set, offered a refund. And it is that simple of just being like, no, I know that you're in the wrong, I'm in the right.
I suppose some people just, their default is to try and be polite and try and be accommodating, and maybe they create these great big gaps that companies can barrel through.
Yeah, I think that our politeness, British politeness is our real worst enemy, but you can be polite while also fighting for yourself. I feel like I'm always very polite to these companies. I say, please, can you look into this? Thank you so much. But also spelling out that, I know that this has gone wrong and can you please look into it? It doesn't need to be hostile. If a company turns it hostile, then so be it. But they, I'd hope that they wouldn't. I do find that sometimes, but if you're polite, then the company's rude to you, then you look good.
I know there's been a lot of anger very recently about dynamic pricing. And a lot of people incredibly cross that, they think they're about to pay one price for Oasis tickets, and then they get to the end and they've finally got the tickets, which they're really excited about. And then they find that price is
not the price that they're going to be paying. And yet, in terms of current consumer law, that's okay. So what do you say to people in those kind of circumstances?
Well, you say it's okay. I mean, it's legal. It's legal, but there are also, I mean, there's a lot of rules here, and again, this is kind of comes down to knowing your rules. Sometimes just knowing the rules, even if one rule, another rule applies, you might be able to help yourself here. So companies aren't supposed to, mislead you on stuff. They're not supposed to missell their products. What you think you're buying should be what you get. And so if you think that if you've been told this is the price and there's no mention of dynamic pricing anywhere, and then you click through and you get sold a completely different price, that's not really allowed. At the same time, companies are allowed to have this dynamic pricing. It depends how it's sold. And I mean, I'm not massive. I didn't even apply for Oasis tickets, so I didn't see this firsthand. But I have heard from other people that not necessarily in all of those cases was it clear that that was going to be the case. So I think there is a bit of wiggle room there, and I wouldn't be surprised if that gets investigated. Maybe I will do so myself, but I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up being escalated and looked into, because it really seems like no one was aware that would be the case until the last minute. So yeah, there's a lot of different conflicting rules going on, but it's legal. But is it ethical? No, not really. We'll see.
Yeah, I think people have become more aware of their rights. They've become more likely to complain because they've become more concerned with their finances over the past couple of years. The cost of living crisis has really hurt people, and it's made them aware of every penny. Have you seen sort of an increase in complaints or an increase in awareness of that people actually maybe know a bit more about their rights?
That's really interesting. Absolutely. I've seen an increase in complaints, where I can tell that the person knows, like I've just said, I can tell that they know they've been wronged, even where it's not necessarily clear. In the past, I would have seen people coming with those cases and saying, "What do I do?" Whereas now it's like, I know my rights, but I'm not getting anywhere. This kind of goes against what I said earlier, in that knowing your rights helps you. It does, but it also helps them in that they know that they can come to me. Whereas someone who doesn't know their rights might just let a company walk all over them. So I've seen quite a lot of people come with cases about things like cars, broken parts, like we've just talked about, where they've been sent the wrong thing, they've taken it to a service and they've been told they're not covered under this guarantee or that guarantee, and people saying, I know this isn't fair, but the company's ignoring me. That happens. And I find that really useful, because they already know what they want, and they're able to tell me what they want, and I can help them get it resolved quickly. I've definitely seen an increase in those compared to, I would say last year. I saw a lot more people. We've had the cost of living crisis, and it's been quite a desperate time for a lot of people. We saw quite an increase in these sad complaints of people saying, I don't have enough money. I don't think this company's given me enough money. And it wasn't necessarily that the company had done anything wrong. This year, I'm seeing a lot more of these people championing themselves and saying, I don't have any money, and I know this company's wronged me, and I'm not going to let them get away with it, but they're not replying to me. And then I'm able to help them get their money back. So yeah, that's actually really inspiring, I think.
So if people want to be informed about their rights, is it easy to find? We've got this wonderful thing, these computers in the palm of our hands. Is it easy to get informed?
To get informed, I don't think it's as easy as it should be. No, I mean, if you know how to use Google, you can get on Citizens Advice. You can Google almost anything, and Citizens Advice will tell you the answer. If you don't have Google, if you're not able to use Google, definitely not as much. I think that things like Martin Lewis's show are brilliant, because he's trying to make that accessible to way more people, and that's what we try to do in the print paper. Is we know it's reaching those people, but there is only so much space we have, and I really don't think that people who don't have that accessibility to Google the questions and find the answers quickly are informed enough. No, I don't really know what the solution is there. More press coverage, but and the rules are so vast as well. There's only so much. You don't know what you don't know. I say this a lot. You don't know what you don't know. So if you don't know what you're looking for, no, I don't think it's that easy to get informed. But I do think that there is a rise in people who are good with the internet, who are Googling and finding their rights. And I think that Citizens Advice is great in that it often comes up near the top. if you have a question like that. So maybe not for the older generation, but I think it's improving.
Yeah. And if people want to come to you, if they want your help, how do they go about that?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you exactly how they go about that. You can write to me. I don't know if you publish this with the podcast, but you can write to me at Laura Purkess at The Sun. Our address is 1 London Bridge Street, London. I don't know what the postcode is, but if you Google that, you'll find it. You can email me. I'm on laura.purkess@thesun.co.uk. I do check all of my emails, and as I said, I will take on any case I think that I can. And if I can't take it on for any reason, I will let you know why. If I can provide help, I will guide you to the right place. So yeah, absolutely contact me. You can also, you can contact, there are a lot of consumer champions in different papers, and we're all inundated, so you can try everyone as well. Do the rounds, and hopefully you'll get the help you need.
And what's the biggest victory that you achieved, the thing that you're most proud of?
A few weeks ago, I finally got together a story I've been working on for a very long time about a lot of people who have been been asked to pay back overpaid benefits. We've seen universal credit, pension credit, tax credits, a whole spectrum. And people are sent these overpayment demands all the time, and everyone knows it's not fair. Often people are being asked to pay money back from 20 years ago for some error on their form. But what we started seeing is that people were writing in, and when we were taking them to HMRC or the DWP and asking them to investigate, it was turning out that there had just been an error. They shouldn't have been sent this overpayment demand. And we saw, a couple of erroneous cases, and then it started to be that almost every case we passed over, there was an error. And it was looking a bit, quite, the majority of cases we were putting over were turning out to be errors. We got some of those cases. I think one of them was a £22,000 pension credit overpayment demand to an elderly man on pension credit. He didn't have any money. He was asked to pay back £22,000, and he would have been paying it back until he was 86, in huge chunks. And he had to cancel all of his insurance policies. He switched where he was shopping. He cancelled his newspaper subscription. It changed his quality of life for almost the rest of his life. And it turned out it was a mistake. And the only way he was able to find that out was we actually fought for that for about 4 months of getting that investigated. And it finally came out that it had been an error at the DWP. And that was he was so grateful. He said, it changed his life, because he'd been expecting for the rest of his life to be paying this huge sum of money back. It was like £256 a month or something, with money he didn't have. And he, every time I've spoken to him, he says, thank you, young lady, you've saved my life. And that's, but he's not the only case. He's possibly one of the worst cases, but we've seen a dozen or so of those cases. And things like that are life-changing when someone if you're on benefits, you obviously haven't got very much money. So to be hit with a £10,000 demand is unthinkable. And yeah, it does take often people like this or papers to intervene to actually get those cases looked into. So yeah, I would say that's been a real victory, kind of getting those cases resolved in of themselves and then pulling them together and realising this is a bit of a pattern. And we've now asked the DWP and HMRC to do a proper review to figure out what's causing these errors. And, hopefully that will stop more happening, but also maybe get some of the cases resolved. So yeah, that's been a recent victory.
And clearly you love being able to help people like that.
I do. I know how frustrating it can be dealing with a company. We've all been there. Something's not getting resolved. You don't know where to go. And I love being that last port of call for people where they've basically given up and they're not expecting anything. And it's like, well, I'll just try The Sun. And we get it resolved and they just can't believe it. And I just find that so heartwarming to be able to do that for people. Yeah, it's really fulfilling. And also it gives me a bit of a kick because I've become cynical. And a lot of these companies, I think, I want to see them do what's right because it feels like they wouldn't do it of their own accord. So that's fulfilling as well. I do really love what I do.
Laura, it's been brilliant to talk to you.
Thank you so much. Lovely to speak to you.
That was Laura Purkess there, the consumer champion from The Sun. And as we said at the start of this podcast, we spoke to Laura before the CMA announced that it would look at the dynamic pricing practices that are used by the likes of Ticketmaster for selling gig tickets, a bit like those ones that were very sought after for Oasis. But now for the bit I love. Did she have a confession, Danni?
She did, and it's becoming quite a familiar one she certainly shares with Jolie Brearley from Pregnant Then Screwed. Listen back to that episode if you've not heard it. And that is all about how much time she spends on Vinted. So we can't let you off the hook just yet, because we have our last question, which we asked all our guests. And that is for a financial confession or a dilemma that they have faced.
Well, okay, it's not a big deal, but I'm an absolute Vinted sucker, and I spend a lot of my evenings, in fact my commutes, looking for blazers on Vinted, and I have about 30 different blazers, which is more than anyone will ever need in their entire life. And I still keep looking. I love wearing a blazer to work, so I often have packages turning up at my house, but it doesn't feel that financially bad because I'm getting them on Vinted and they're often like £10. So to me, it feels like a real saving. But did I need them? No. But I like a good collection of blazers. So off the top of my head, that is my financial confession.
My kids are also completely obsessed with Vinted and jeans. I don't know how many jeans any teenager needs, but they have multiple pairs. I'm talking 20 plus now. And you just think, really?
Interesting. I do like jeans. I have a lot of jeans. Do you know what? What's funny is that before I actually had money, so when I was at university, I loved buying new clothes. I loved going shopping. And then I think once I started earning money, I decided, wow, £40 on a t-shirt is interesting. So I switched to Vinted and Depop. And now my shopping habits are the same, but I spend a fraction of the price, so it doesn't feel as bad. Even though it's unnecessary. It's like, well, it's basically free. You know, if it's £5, it's basically free. It would be a crime not to buy it.
We've spoken about girl math before. There we go. Laura, it's
girl
been
math,
lovely.
there you go.
It's been great to talk to
Thank you so much. And you.
This is also a confession that I can relate to. So I don't tend to buy so many clothes for myself off there, but I do think I have like a mild addiction for buying my daughter clothes on there. And she has so many hand-me-downs, and she also now wears a uniform to her preschool. So I don't know why I'm buying things on Vinted, but I just love a bargain. I get like branded clothes that I would never buy new, and they're nearly new and they're so cheap. And it's a guilty pleasure, I think.
I'm there, I must admit, although I have just started to upload loads of my old clothes onto Vinted as well. So maybe it'll become a two-way street and I'll actually then only spend the money I make on Vinted buying stuff off Vinted. But there we go. I did mention that Jolie's episode is a great one to listen back to, talking about childcare and a lot of changes just in the last few weeks with childcare.
In our next episode, we're going to hear from our founding ambassador, Helena Morrissey, about how she makes her household budgets work with 9 children and how she has prioritised spending over the years, particularly as she's been the sole breadwinner for a lot of that time. Now, obviously, her life has been exceptional in many ways. Not many people have 9 children, but I know that she's got some great ideas that we can all learn some lessons from, and some that I definitely think Danni and I wish we'd known sooner.
Yeah, definitely wish I'd known some of those things sooner, but there we go. That's why we're sharing this with you, because hopefully some of you will be able to act on them at the right point, and it could really make a difference to your financial life. Look, remember, we love to hear from you via our social media pages. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and X. And remember, you can sign up to the newsletter as well via the website, ajbellmoneymatters.co.uk.
And we will keep you up to date there with all of our articles, podcasts, and events. Until next time, thank you so much for listening.
Before you go, please remember this podcast is for educational purposes, and the views expressed don't necessarily reflect those of AJ Bell. The podcast isn't telling you if a certain investment is suitable or not. Don't forget that the value of investments can change, and you can lose money as well as make it. It's also important to remember that how you're taxed will depend on your individual circumstances, and rules can change. The way an investment performed in the past may not be the same as how it behaves in the future. If you want help, go see a qualified financial advisor.